Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's conversation. This is the third in the New Standards series, and tonight it will focus on neurodiversity. I'm Harriet Jennings. My pronouns are she, her. I have dark brown hair with a blonde streak, and I'm wearing a blue jacket. And together with Manoj Verghese, I have been planning this series at the AA with the hope of widening the conversation about what makes inclusive spaces. So the New Standards series aims to identify and confront some of the barriers to architecture, its education and practice, and consider how these can be overcome to embrace wider forms of creativity. And each event in the series addresses the idea of comfort to challenge the idea of standards as a bare minimum or a one-size-fits-all approach. And hopefully together we'll question how we might better provide comfort in all its nuanced forms. So as well as conversations with the brilliant Jordan Whitewood-Neal that have really helped shape this series, this event in particular has evolved out of workshops run by the Writing Centre here at the Architectural Association, which are led by Claire Potter. So thank you also, Claire, who can't be with us tonight, but really thank you for your support and guidance for this event. And one of the main drivers behind the series in general has been to examine how we can move beyond words and turn these conversations in the public programme into forms of action. So we're hoping that this series will be a test bed at the AA for future events, and hopefully will help us make all events going forwards more inclusive. And also other aspects of AA life. So yeah, we're planning to do a charrette in February, which will invite teams made up of the participants from this series, AA staff, students, and others, to come and build interventions in the AA and come up with new policy suggestions that we want to document and then put forwards to the AA to try and make it more comfortable for everyone. So we hope that will be a form of catalysing more long-term and some meaningful change. So tonight I'm really delighted to welcome our presenters, Abe, Christian and Helen. So I'll briefly introduce them. Abe Rogers is a London-based designer known for a wide-ranging practice informed by his unique imagination. He founded Abe Rogers Design, ARD, in 2004, and it has since become an established studio specialising in the design of small spaces and for experimental design projects that are dynamic and rigorous, enriched with colour and narrative while providing a high level of functionality and subtlety in design. Christian Boer is a graphic designer. He's been challenged by dyslexia as long as he can remember, which made him decide to use his graduation project for the University of the Arts Utrecht to find a solution to improve readability for people with dyslexia, and that led him to create the Dyslexie typeface. And Helen Kane is an access consultant and surveyor who relishes the potential of the newly published Neurodiversity design standards, the PAS 6463. She has lived experience of neurodivergence, and Helen's practice, Neuro by Design, opens up conversations to enable clients to capture potential, talent, relaxation, splendour and awards in the built environment. So in tonight's conversation, they will each reflect on how we can embrace the potential of neurodiversity to broaden creative practices. Abe will share his experiences being a dyslexic designer, offering insight into a design career with a neurodiverse slant. Christian will describe the unlearning of graphic design required to create the accessible typeface. And Helen will discuss the new Design for the Mind standards and highlight neuroscience findings and share some of her own experiences of neurodiversity-influenced design. And after their presentations, the conversation will hopefully open up around this communal table, and we want it to be quite informal and comfortable for everyone, so please feel free to sit around it if you want to do so, and I can bring around the microphones if you have any questions, so yeah, feel free to chip in at any point. And just to make everyone aware that this event has got British Sign Language interpretation, so a massive thank you to Samaya and Bernadette for being here tonight. They're sitting opposite me, and if you need a clear line of vision to them, please make sure you're either sitting around the table or somewhere that you can see, and feel free to ask people to move if needed. We also have a quiet room in the room opposite there. It has signs on the door, and yeah, feel free to go in there at any point if you need. And there's also an accessible toilet through these doors and to the left with signage pointing you there. And if anyone needs anything at any point tonight, please just come and let me know. And there's some more seating over there if anyone wants some more distance seating for COVID. So I think we'll now hand over to Abe for the first presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Well, thank you very much for having us. I'm Abe Rogers, he wearing a green jacket, or green top, to be precise. I think I'm going to do a quick talk and kind of tour through our work. I think, the exciting thing about being dyslexic is we never really know where things are going to go, so it's quite hard to define strict parameters. This is our great power. We have to let go of control in a different way in order to explore our journey. So please forgive any mistakes, but maybe they're not mistakes, maybe they're purposeful. I think part of being dyslexic, we talk very fast, we think very fast, and we see things sometimes apparently quite differently. And we have different fascinations. Can be with numbers, with colours, with smells. We seem to really lack boundaries, and we seem to lack borders, and that can take us into different places, both art school and prison being two very possible places by the statistics, one being more positive than the other. I also think as dyslexic we want to be always away from corners, so actually sitting here for me is really good because I can see the whole room, I can see every door, and I can kind of feel comfortable. People coming from behind you makes you very nervous. In design, I really try to remove corners by putting radiuses into them. It's only very recently I realised that's why I've always done it, but so much is about kind of instinct rather than... So as I'm already consuming time, I better move on to my presentation. Now, what do I do? Okay, excellent, there we are. So, 9 projects, 11 minutes. I'm already in trouble because I've stolen a minute from someone else, but I think we all have time to share, so I really think we shouldn't be greedy. Then we can allow. Anyway, 1, inspiration. What is design about inspiration? I think, design, we have different conditions. 15% of the UK is neurodiverse, but we operate in rules for the other 85%. We look at the deep abyss, which you sit under, huge volumes of pressure, so you have to really perform in different ways. In the deep abyss, you can no longer see red, so fish make themselves red, so they kind of vanish. This is the deep sea anglerfish, which in these strange conditions can dislocate its jaw to eat things twice its size, uses haptic communication through its little light that it lures you over and then eats you. And the men sit there doing nothing, tiny little man, but providing sperm. So I think this is a very interesting relationship. And the woman has 6 men often attached to her as parasites. The octopus, which I think maybe is one of the most extraordinary of all animals, because it completely can transform its shape, its colour, its form. It has no bones. It completely manoeuvres itself around through tiny holes. And I think as a piece of design, it's extraordinary. It challenges all the rules. It surely is dyslexic. It has brains in all its legs. Can't we have more octopuses? Their numbers, I really am fascinated by numbers. The patterns, the things they do, counting in different orders, 9, 11, particularly numbers which are not even or are even odd. So I think this kind of counting of things is really part of my process. I think another really interesting thing about dyslexia is we're also individual. There is no real patterns, and we have different things. Colour, the passionate vibrancy of fruit and vegetables produce the most powerful colour. But when we paint a room orange of the orange, people go, why is that room so bright? But when we buy an orange, we tend to be really happy. So I think we need to be more confident with how we use colour and how we see the transition from the blue sky and the yellow field of sunflowers to the yellow on the wall. We've just painted lots of hospital corridors. Anyway, first project, 1, pyramid. I think like ages ago, because I'm really ancient, like 94, we really discovered design. We had a book called The Hot House by Andrea Baranzi. We saw design could be anything and started to play. We built a pyramid. However, I left school at 16, having failed O-level pottery twice and maths multiple times with 2 O-levels, which is really unimpressive. So when I came to make a pyramid, I made a pyramid from 4 90-degree angles, which was all you mathematicians and architects would realize means your pyramid is flat on the floor. So very quickly, we had to recut our pyramid and rewrap it in rubber. and stitch it back together again. Using a pencil and a series of strings, we then measured the angles. And this started to teach me that by doing things, we can understand things which we cannot be taught to in school. So once you start to sail on a boat, you understand Pacific gravity. It kind of seems really obvious. But in a classroom, you can never understand that. I went to Royal College with my 2 O-levels. Can we have some sound? Yeah. Where actually Peter here taught me. So to suddenly go from 2 O-levels to an MA seemed a huge jump. And I have to say, I kind of worked insanely hard through that period and really discovering what design could be, what it could do. And one of the first, coming out of the Royal College, we did this piece at Spectrum Design Week, which is a very boring trade show where we attached a sound to each door handle. So suddenly, people are laughing in a trade show. And our design, which is not the door handle, maybe it's the blue door, but it's the sounds that we attach to it, something you can't see, totally transforms the relationship with the user and the door handle, and we start to get to this laughter in college, which is a huge thing. And laughter really changes our stress. It makes us feel happy. It breaks down the barriers. So design is also the invisible as well as the visible. It's the acoustics. It's the sounds that we create. I did say I could talk pretty fast. So we were asked to look at the future of offices and what the future of the offices can be. What's going on there? Why is this not working? So, this is when the laptop has been invented and everything else, and which is all about mobility, but the office, which you use the laptop in, feels so static. So we start to play with how we can create an office which can be as mobile as the laptop itself. The fact that the laptop here in question is, I think, 8 meg, shows you how much technology has changed over the year. I think, again, this is 2001. And it was a moment when we were painting everything red, RAW 3020. So in 2001, we designed a Comme des Garçons, which was a massive deal in Paris, and suddenly we really became quite well known. It was all about creating this alien way. But inside within the shop, we were given a space to create an installation that kind of expressed the brand. So we had this red room with 10 dancing red cubes that would shuffle and spin, apparently randomly, but in fact kind of programmed, and this kind of trickling of red everywhere. This is shown to my business partner at the time, and this whole kind of sense of movement and space really started to create a different type of interior. Now, everything made of fiberglass, which may be incredibly unsustainable, but it's the only fashion shop I've ever designed that still sits there unchanged 20 years later. So there's different ways of really calculating the carbon, I guess. So in 2001, we created a space called a responsive space, which has a roof that follows you around the place. Thinking, well, why does a roof need to be steel? And if we start to play with the roof, we really start to challenge the sense of the space. And when we first did this, we had the gearing a bit wrong, and the roof went crazily fast and crazily high, and the curator said, no, stop, this is not acceptable. And I have to say, when we came to dismantle it, we had like one wire still, and it was about to collapse. We had safety things in there. But we were really experimenting, and things would really go wrong. And it was only through pushing the boundary, and I have to say, all of my degree pieces completely exploded before my degree show, because I was always trying to push things and find ways to do so. This luckily has not fallen down yet, which is the ladder that likes the wall, which really looks at how can we sit in a different position within a space. Why do we always need to be at the same level? Why do we always need to be looking? So you can sit up higher. There's no connection. Look, just rubber friction. You have a little desk above it, and you can sit in your own little world up there. Okay. This is a place we've just finished in Japan, where we've never been to site. We've done everything remotely, and you could only do it with the Japanese because they're so damn precise. We've created a series of these spinning doors, which completely change the way the place can work and live, and you just spin these around. And then we just use raw installation, so everything is breathing, everything can be seen, and this dynamic kitchen surface that also becomes a worktop for making things, a place to discuss around a horizontal surface using local tiles in Prussian blue. So starting with all this kind of experimentalization, we ended up designing a Maggie's, so going much more architectural. The Maggie's is wrapped in this terracotta dug from the ground in these kind of series of really fleshy reds, from the kind of dark clays to the more coral. And this red sits amongst the car park in this very hostile environment, and it can be seen from anywhere. But also we really worked on the kind of porosity of this building. So you can see straight through the windows. Well, obviously you can see through a window, but you see through and out the other side. Everywhere you can always see multiple exits. Makes you feel much more secure. You have these large spaces that you can come together and see the light passing. You see shadows. When you're in a hospital, you never see shadow because the light is all flat. You'll never see the natural light fights to get its way through the dirty windows because everyone is so busy keeping people alive, they're not cleaning the windows. So gives you a completely different experience. You go from being absolutely impotent in the hospital to suddenly being able to breathe in the Maggie's. And if we had longer, I would run you a little video of a series of users who are interviewed, and really what they say is so glorious. And it's not because of our amazing architecture, it is really because of the extraordinary brief that Maggie sets. Framed by this vibrant coral staircase, but then you go into these small intimate spaces which have some missing corners and are all made from this extraordinary polished plaster and all have daylight, because a toilet in the context of Maggie's is a place you may well escape for privacy and to cry, to deal with your emotions. So it needs to feel like a chapel. It needs to protect you. It needs to nurture you. And I think as dyslexics, sometimes we need that kind of nurturing. I mean, we can think of Oliver Sacks, etc. But then the door handles, we carved every door handle by hand. We got a carpenter to do it. Each one a little bit different, so they become sculptures. So when you're using the door handle, you're feeling through your hands the design. So you're feeling that someone has thought about you. And that relationship is so powerful, both as kind of neurodiverse people or as humans generally. And so really what we're talking about is how to make design more human. And then finally, we've just this year won the Walters Economic Award, which is the second biggest economic award in the world. As a dyslexic with 2 O-levels who failed maths in so many different ways, it feels like quite an achievement, and I can be proud. And we really developed this very architectural notion about the third carer. So you have the medical staff being the first carer, the support network being the second carer, how the building, the space, how it can care for us, how we can wrap us up in pink, how we can charge the acoustics, how we can make the human sitting at the center of the space feel their place. And in order to do this, we created a massive collective intelligence with brilliant graphic designers, with doctors, with neurologists, with economists, with patients. And we gathered more and more information. We would show them design, the ideas, and we would adapt and change them. So for us, the future of the hospital must be human-centered, community-focused, naturally driven, and flexible and future-proof. I do not have time to go into much more detail, but this is the kind of section showing the activities going on. And to break down, to dissolve the barriers of the hospital, we need to learn from the museum, we need to learn from the church, and we need to softly bring people in. We need to ban the car, we need to remove the car park, we need to remove the basement, we need to put a market underneath it, so people have other reasons to come to the hospital. We need to put a raised park above it, and then that park, which you go to, then allows these green corridors to spread out. And then as you go up the building, you'll see every ward has access to a balcony where there's a tree. So when you look out the window, you see a tree. And then we really try to minimize the walking distance, and we try to make it as hard as possible to get lost. And you'll notice it's circular, so we're really minimizing the corners. There's no corridor. There are circulation spaces, but they always have secondary activities in it. And then on the roof, we have an urban allotment that sits there. Now, we've taken a hectare of the city, we've built a 9-story tower on top of this risen platform, but we've given the city back a hectare of parkland. So there's no loss of green space at all. And the influence that does to both the community using it and the community approaching it and the community inside it is massive. And now suddenly we have volunteer gardeners working in the hospital, and it starts to create a different culture. And then we have the food coming from the rooftop into the kitchens, and people start to feel, it becomes much more around an ecology, an ecosystem, which is really, we really think the hospital should be. Now, I'm not sure how many minutes I was, but that's it. 13. I had a 10. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Christian Boer. I'm a graphic designer, and I have dyslexia. And I hid my dyslexia all my life because my earlier teachers were always punishing me to let me work harder. So when I graduated in 2008, it was a great moment for me to open up and look at my dyslexia and think of something about it. And that ended up making me the Dyslexie font. So it is a little bit contradictory within making a typeface. It was my first typeface I made. Let's begin with dyslexia. I heard your talk, and you're thinking in images, and the language is too slow, and that's the reason why you're talking so fast. I got to say, it's typical. I love it. So here you see two brains. You don't see dyslexia on the outside, but you can see it with an MRI scanner. So, and when you put some neurotypical brain and a dyslexic brain, you will see different patterns. And sometimes those different patterns will be beneficial for the dyslexic person, and sometimes it will be not that beneficial. It will work against. And you will see in this image, you will see two MRIs where a typical neural brain will use 3 areas and one on the other side, where a dyslexic brain will use more one area. And having problems with describing or reading and understanding text to image back again. And then I get from non-dyslexic people always like, but how does it feel for you to read, or how does it work? And I always ask them the same question back, but how does it feel for you? And they say, I don't know, I just do it. Yeah, and I'm born with dyslexia, so I don't have any other comparison. But then after a while, I just try to explain it. Sometimes you see on the internet from little clips that move letters or something, but we don't move them before our eyes. It's a process in the brain, and so on the end, it's more when somebody explains us, like you make an error and you look like, okay, I reread it what I write for 5 times and I didn't see an error, and they point it out and then it appears. It's more like an optical illusion. And if you look at this image, the top side of this figure will appear darker because your brain is wired to see the underside is always with a shadow. So, but they are equal. And if I get it away, you will see, no, the lower part is lighter because there needs to be shadow. It's an optical illusion. Your brain is wired. So that's the reason why teachers will say, you make the same mistake over and over again, don't you see it? No, our brain is different. And we cannot help it, you cannot help it, to see this optical illusion different. So, and what is the effect of that if you put somebody in with dyslexia in an eye tracker? You see focus points, how long they focus, and not all words or not all letters are a problem, but when they try to read it, they miss a capital letter, or they have problems with a couple of letters, or a long word or something, and they make a mistake while they translate it to understand what they are reading in context, and they make a mistake and they go back, or they skip a part or they go back because it doesn't match in their head, like it is not good what I read. I made a reading error. And in this way, it takes like 5 times more energy for somebody with dyslexia to read. And yeah, you will see it's crisscross all over the place. So then we go to a regular typeface, and that was something about when you have a graphic design school or an art school, you got flyers, logos, and hierarchy, and typefaces are holy. So you got here Helvetica. It's one of the most used typefaces in the world. It's a good typeface. But when you make a typeface, there is a couple of rules. You make them as equal, each letter. You make a little grid, so everything must fits on each other. So you got a quiet, even reading experience. And this is big, but yeah, on the side you see size 14 for a screen and size 10 for paper. And if you look at the letters, if you put the arch of the H on the R and the N and the M and the U, it will fit all on each other. So for people with dyslexia that have problems with reading and making reading errors, you're making twin letters, and that's the most like crazy thing you can do for people with dyslexia, making twin letters. Let's thread them. They are already hard. Let's thread them more. Design point, I understand it, but it's not helping. So the teachers were, no, you cannot do that and make adjustments to that. And I said, the function of a typeface is to bring the message. Otherwise you're making nice pictures.
Or not.
Yeah, or not, but you're not making a typeface. The function of a typeface is to bring across the message and to be readable. So I will do the opposite of all the rules that you say about the typeface. And most teachers were like, no, you cannot do this. How can we judge you? Your graduation project, I don't know. Please stop with this. But I had one head teacher, and he was dyslexia. He had dyslexia himself, and he came across after last class, and he said, just go on. So it started for me with let's do something about dyslexia, layout, and all that kind of stuff. And this kind of words like mirroring, mixing up, switching, rotating, you hear it when you deliver, you make some errors. You're looking for the error, and you don't think about what they really say. Until I read it, and I was like, but those are all 3D movements on a 2D object in the world. So maybe we treat the 2D objects as 3D in our brain to process it. And maybe not all the letters. And it is not only this is a good visual to show for non-dyslexics. But it is also the shape of the twin letters, but also the location within the word, strange combination of characters, unusual words, long words, sounds that look like each other, like the E and the A. If I get a phone call and somebody in England calls me, it's an E or A, I don't hear the difference. So I started with, okay, the basic is different, and difference between letters, characters, and easier to recognize of all parts that we make mistakes. So what I used was my brain, what makes mistakes, to use it refers to design. So like the D here with the circle around it, I did it with every letter, every number in my head, and trying to mix it in any other way with other letters, and trying to change them. So you got here, the underside is bold, so you get a sturdy baseline to follow before you go to the next line. But also you don't flip them upside down. It's like a pyramid. It's like a brick on a wheel. It always flips right, because if you have the bold side up, it's not correct in your head. But also like easy things like making openings just bigger. It's like, now it's really clear, but it's size 10 on a paper in a whole page. It's a part of a second that you need to recognize in context, and also describe it to understand what you just read. So every small thing will help in that part. And I also look at the twin letters and just slanted one, like the I and the J. Just slant one, so you don't read JJ or II. And I also slanted a part of the letters to look at what I did was look how to most people with dyslexia write letters together, what they start to learn when they are at elementary school, because they are already slow. Then you need to go to block letters, but there you lose your movement in the letters, and I used that movement back in the typeface to make the differentiation. Longer ascenders and descenders is easy as that, so the H is not an N. Different heights within the letters, just to make it more difference between the letters. I got always, like, when I write a paragraph, the first paragraph is one sentence. I forget everything, like punctuation, capitals. But also when I read and I'm like in the middle of the page, I just missed the capital letter, and then two sentences together, it's confusing. So just making the capitals bolder, like it's a kind of a stop in the sense, like, okay, here you need to stop and go to the next sentence. So when I designed this, I had like 8 different dyslexic people with like mild dyslexia and severe dyslexia. And when I started, I sent the typeface to them and with the capitals, and they said, like, no, it's distracting too much, and and I found out that when you are looking at a page of text, it's a gray field, and if you got like 2 bold letters in it within capitals, then it's like spiders on a page. So when you focus to read, it's too distracting. So I made them smaller, but also not too small, so the severe dyslexic will miss them. And so it was a big back and forward, adjusting to fine tune it. So the whole group wasn't distracted, but also noticed it up. So it was a fine balance within that. But also the X height of the letters to make more space within the letters, but not wider, because otherwise all the pages are 5-6 pages more than one page. But also the spacing between the letters. So especially when you have long words, and it's like melting together the letters. You miss the middle 4 or 5 letters, and I call it always a crowding effect. It's not really a word or something, but yeah, it melts together. So spacing is something that I did by hand before I made the typeface itself already. So on the end, they did an eye track research in University of Lille, and what they discovered, like the upside is non-dyslexic, and the underside is with dyslexie font, and they have a more regular pattern, so more fluent, and even focus points. And what they discovered, like, the time is faster, but I don't care if you read really slow, but you understand what you read. It's much better. So what they done is when you read it, you need to answer a couple of questions afterwards, so you cannot cheat or something. And but they came back with a result like they have bigger pupils when they read with dyslexia. So I was like, okay, they are more relaxed or something. But no, they came back with, because of the working memory to process letters per focus points, because it was easier for them to process, they took on more signs at each focus point. So, and that looks a little bit like what the same technique what speed readers use with their thumbs wider to broaden your spectrum or your vision within that. So that was unexpected, came back, so that was nice. So I graduated with it in 2008, and I was thinking that I was one of the 100 people in the world with dyslexia, because I always hide it, I never talked about it, and then afterwards it went global, dyslexic people everywhere, and I learned a lot about dyslexia myself. So, and that was like, for me, an opening that I was, if I knew this in elementary school or middle school, it would help me so much more to know that beside reading, there's so much more to learn about yourself, about your dyslexic side, so you know what's going on. And so I'm doing in the Netherlands, like last 2018 from now, every first week of October, the week of dyslexia, and we invite people to talk, professors, and so it's really nice. And we have also a Kids Day where we focus only on the good, positive side of dyslexia, where the talents are within the group, and that's really cool to do. So, thank you.
I'm Helen Kane. I'm pronouns she, her. I have a black jacket on and I've got shoulder length hair. So I'm an access consultant and an inclusive designer, and within those big terms I also specialise in neurodiversity and active travel and biophilic design and talking to people, which are all related to neurodiversity. So last week I had a call to say, can you talk about outside the standards next week? Well, the regulations came out last week, so it's a bit quick to go beyond, but I'll do my best, yeah. So I'm doing challenging typical standards in neurodiversity. So this is the regulation. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. I can't talk about it because I'm not licensed to talk about it, because it's a BSI document. It's called the PAS, the Publicly Available Specification. I've been waiting for about 20 years for this to come out, and it's delightful to know that it's there, because for the first time we have some guidance on neurodiversity. And thank you for your delightful talks as well. That was great to hear about dyslexia, one of many neurodivergent conditions, but I can't talk about them. So I can tell you about the contents and without producing their page, but there's a thing in inclusion called the social model of disability, which means that rather than talking about people's conditions, that would be the medical model, or how we can help people, which is the charity model. We talk about the social model, which means that the environment should accommodate everyone. So we shouldn't say because there are blind people, people with hearing impairments, or people who are dyslexic, we should do this. We have to design for everybody, which is great. If we can understand what everybody needs, aren't we all unique? So these are the subjects that, after many, many years of debate and research, the PAS decided to put in. And I've got to say that the PAS is really great, because usually it goes into a British standard in about a year, but this is going straight global. It's going to be something that the world has been waiting for, so it's going to be an international standard in ISO, so really, really good. Have a look at it. So the most important thing about the document is that it gives us a definition, quite a few definitions actually, debated by committee. Everyone will have their own take on words, but this is the kind of thing that gives us a guidance. So neurodiversity, to me, is just a biological fact. We're all different. We've got infinite variations in the way the senses come at us, the way we perceive them, we receive them, we process them, we store them, we react to them. And some people will seek, and some people will avoid sensory stimulation, and all of us are messy. We're on a spectrum, so we're all different. And then they come up with the term neurodivergent. So to be neurodivergent, you have to understand what neurotypical is. And as there isn't a real different definition of neurotypical, neurodivergent kind of falls into conditions. But the definition in the PAS is a brain cognitive profile that functions in ways that diverge significantly from the dominant societal standards. No normal, no average, no typical. They put neurotypical in there. Okay. So these are the things that I can't talk to you about. This is behind the scenes of the regulations. So what they don't talk to you about is the conditions, and here they are. This is a diagram that's been made up by people who are neurodivergent. They called it neurodiverse in those days, but you can see lots of different names that are medically related, and they're all overlapping. There are commonalities, and I've got to say that I've met lots of people with dyslexia, and they're all different, obviously, and they all see differently, but oh my God, they see space. You see space so well, and engineers and architects see in 3D, and it's amazing colour and everything else. Words might be an issue, but that's a small part of the brain. I can send you this afterwards. So these terms will change, and lots of people have late diagnosis. There's a particular example is ADHD in women. People used to think that hyperactivity in boys in school was an indicator of ADHD, but now they find that girls were dreamy, so they've gone through their whole lives being undiagnosed. And I'm sure, lack of diagnosis in school has affected you both. There's a recent study that says that 80% of people in prison are neurodivergent, and most of those are dyslexic, and most of those don't know about it. Yeah? So it's difficult to look inside the brain. You used to have to die before they saw your brain. It's a bit better now. Okay. So these are things I also can't talk about, the positives and the people, the great inventors and leaders and all the beautiful things. Don't take a picture, I'm not allowed to talk about it. Right, so the one thing it doesn't go into is the neuroscience, and that's my fascination. It's absolutely amazing. Understanding how the brain works, I recommend to everyone. But these are the really, really basics. It starts off right in the middle of the brain with the reptilian complex, stuff we had when the dinosaurs were around, and we knew what fear was, and we ran and we escaped, and that's your gut reaction, your instinct, and that's the most important part of your brain. That's your first reaction. And after that, it gets dampened down by logic and a billion neurons a second sending messages in the neocortex. And it gets all confusing. But if you go with the gut reaction, that's where you are. And neurodiversity is, everyone is different in different ways. But I found that neurodivergence, there's a lot of commonality in the reptilian complex. That fight or flight thing is the thing that really gets us all. And obviously, our brain's connected to our body. It goes straight down the spinal cord. So the fight or flight is what we really need to look at. You know what happens when you get scared. You get loads of adrenaline. Your heart beats faster. You might get a panic attack. Your stomach empties so you can run faster. That's the really important thing. We're all different. We've explained that. If I had time, I'd let you look at the cross and see what happened to the image around it. And if I mentioned a colour or, say, the word movement, something different would happen in everyone's brains. I'm not going to move on quickly because we've only got 10 minutes. But every visual illusion is there because your brains work differently. And in dyslexia, we say that we don't read words. Once we learn them in school, we look at the first and last letter, and the rest doesn't matter. So, we've got commonalities there. And the senses are not talked about in the PAS either. They don't say that the dominant sense is vision, and 50% of our brain is taken up with processing vision. We've got a different area for faces and for light and for colour and shape and all that. It's really complicated, but when you go to the optician and they shine a light in your eye, you can see your blood vessels, and your brain ignores the blood vessels because it's not necessary, and it ignores a lot of other things. And they say that 90% of what we do is subconscious. Our brain's ticking away in the background, we do very little consciously. But 3% of processing is taken up by hearing, and that's much faster processing, so it can override vision in some ways. And there are lots of other things, like you talked about music. So music and smell are the faster to recall and memory because of their location to the brain. And in children under 5, before they learn language, because brain and colour are next to each other, they process colour faster than adults. So there's a whole lot of things going on. And the PAS doesn't really talk about the multisensory impact and neurodiversity. But the way to boil the PAS down really simply is clarity. And there's a picture of the underground, and like the Dyslexie font, they decided they would have their own font. They designed it many, many years ago. So they know the importance of decision points and reassurance points and the distances and that you need to move around spaces, and they work that out. And choice, there's a picture of a heat map there. We all perceive heat differently. The fact that the window is open means that you perceive the temperature to be 3 degrees difference, whether it is or not. Lots of mind tricks going on with temperature. Men and women, 5 degrees different, but the office temperature, except for the men of a certain age, of a certain weight, and calm. Calm is really important. There's a quiet room over there. If we have the chance to toggle in our brains, so we do some focus work and then some relaxation and some collaboration, that's how we're most efficient. So although you think quiet rooms may be a luxury, they're actually the most efficient thing you can put in a building. And biophilic design, there's a bit about that, you can read more. Biophilic is basically related to the fact that when we see things from nature, the reptilian brain again, we relax. Any other pattern, any other line, our brains are going, what's that mean? Stressing out, trying to work it out. So if you want to relax people, put in natural things. It doesn't have to be plants, it could be unnatural curves, or waves or clouds or anything, but that's the way, and you'll find that lots of people who are neurodivergent will do that. Look to nature. So this will freak you out. I'll move on quickly. The zebra line, unnatural. It is natural. The other ones are unnatural. So big word now. Gamma oscillations in your brain increase when you see sharp, unnatural lines. You've got blinds here, but a lot of people have got Venetian blinds. Lots of lines around, lines outside buildings. They give you headaches and migraines. So if you've got people in your office that've got migraines, don't know, neuroscientists can't find out what it is, take away the lines, see what happens. Work for me. Okay, so now I get to the lived experience part. Okay, I don't often talk about this. I have a thing called misophonia. It's a condition that was only discovered in 2001. I didn't know about it all the way through school and open plan offices. I didn't know why I was reacting the way I did, but there is this thing where repetitive noises or light or actions like tapping of a desk or clicking a pen or chewing loudly in your ear put you into that primitive part of your brain and keep you there in the fight or flight zone. It's not something you've got control over. I've learned a lot about it, by understanding neuroscience, talking to psychologists and things. But every time I talk about it, somebody will say, I got that, or I know someone who got that. And they say that 25% of people have it. And it's got commonalities with lots of other neurodivergent conditions as well. And there's a disrespectful cartoon there with me looking for the source of the crunch in misophonia. You get so angry sometimes you want to kill people. But when you know what it is, you can switch your thought from the conscious, unconscious, and control it, and you can have coping mechanisms. So the more people talk about being neurodivergent, the more we understand. And I never stop learning when I help design buildings. Always talk about it, always something new to hear about. And the other thing I discovered recently I had is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now there's a picture of the window there again, not just temperature changes when the window is open, but there are things in your processing called event boundaries. You know, you want to find your phone, you know it's upstairs, you go upstairs, by the time you get up there, you've forgotten where your phone is. It's because every archway, every doorway, every staircase is an event boundary. Your mind wipes over a little bit of memory to move into that next room, and with that sometimes goes, I'm looking for my phone. Okay, so event boundaries are really important to PTSD because when you have a trauma, you might not know about it, and that happened with me. I've travelled the world, really dangerous countries. I have been through 3 civil wars. Love it, absolutely no fear whatsoever. And then one day, I saw a hole kicked in a wall in my house that was rented out, and I had a panic attack. I never had a panic attack, didn't know what it was. And my journey of discovery is that when you have a trauma, you often have a mask that comes across it, a shield. So I'm told that, for instance, when someone's in a room where their parent is being raped and they're watching TV, they will mask it with that television program. But when that memory comes back as that exact television program, the mask comes off. So it's a screen memory that you put up. So obviously something happened when I was younger. When you have a pattern of behaviour in your brain, it's always there. You can't change it. All you can do is overwrite it. So for PTSD treatment, what I've got to do is go back to find out what the trauma was, and then find out every sensory input at the time and know what the triggers are and analyse them and write a different message over the top of it. So say you were attacked in Paddington Station. What was the weather like? Who was there? What was playing on the radio? What was the time of year? You've got to go through and analyse all that to have any hope. And if you open that door or window, and that happens a lot in hotels that I've dealt with, then that memory can creep in. So that's a few things about a few less talked about neurodivergent conditions. There are lots of others. My favourite is trypophobia, where there are people who recognise the pattern in lotus seed heads, and they say it's because as we evolved, there were people prehistorically who understood the pattern of parasites, and they could recognise it. So the same pattern as in strawberries. So if you ever find someone who's afraid of strawberries and you're afraid of a parasite attack, find someone who's got trypophobia. And I wondered about that. And last week I read a news article about a man who hadn't showered for 50 years. Yeah? Are you with me? Yeah?
It's like in Iran or something.
Yeah, he had a shower and he died because he had a minor parasitic infection. So, yeah, there are really good things. Really good things. So, hopefully that will make you talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence more.
Meat or something like that. Like he'd eat like raw animal carcasses and stuff. Like he didn't like normal food.
Especially not strawberries and lotus seed heads. But yeah, the mind is absolutely amazing. Lots of positive tricks and amazing things. But in design, you know, if you keep it simple, make it calm, don't avoid colour. Although I would say that trauma and red, talk about it.
I know, I would challenge you on that slightly, but
Yeah, lots of people do. But if you talk to people, to the Deaf Academy, in Exmouth, they use the colour red, but they use it in a particular place, and they talked about it.
Right.
So, within that difficulty of everyone is different, and some people like red and some people don't. You design buildings individually, so always talk. That's my message. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for your wonderful presentations. They were super interesting and I think covered a really broad range of topics in this area, from Abe, your amazing designs that kind of use, like we said, colour, but also all sorts of senses and really sort of push the boundaries of what's expected of a design or a building or a space. Christian, like a really in-depth evolution of quite a personal project that actually has really wide applications and has helped loads of people. And Helen, thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences with us. It's very kind of you. And also talking us around the Design for the Mind standards. I would like to ask you, actually, why can't you talk about them?
Oh, just because of the social model of disability. Oh. So you'll find in the PAS, they will say, give an example and say such as ADHD or autism, but they won't go into detail. And it was only because I talked about misophonia and PTSD and a few other things that I managed to get in ticking clocks between the draft and the final. So there was a massive reaction from people who wanted their conditions, but you have to understand that you don't design for one condition, and if you did, it would be exclusive. So
I switched mics, but I really liked what you said at the end as well, Helen, about how we sort of want, it's good to design for specificity because everyone has specific needs and we do need to bear those in mind, but then people have contradicting needs. And so on the one hand, you want to be specific, but you also kind of need to have everyone's needs in mind, and actually it's really important to have these conversations, and compromise comes into it, but also kind of be as broad and generous as we can. And I wanted to ask you all a bit more about your experiences of education, because we're in this School of Architecture, and you all spoke a bit about being diagnosed or not with, neurodivergence, and I wondered, one of the artists in a previous talk, Aaron Williamson, kind of spoke about sometimes it's difficult, he described it as coming out as disabled, and there's sometimes some, you have to have difficult conversations or certain things are expected of you, and sometimes it's quite hard to disclose that. Then on the other hand, as has been mentioned tonight, lots of people aren't diagnosed, and that's a problem because then they don't have access to certain forms of help. So I guess just be interesting for you to reflect on if it's helpful or limiting to be sort of categorised and be diagnosed, and how you found it helpful or not, and how you think it could be helpful for people going forwards.
Well, I was diagnosed really early. My dad was dyslexic, so I've kind of always known I was dyslexic. The fact that the schools couldn't really process it to an extent meant I left endless schools, which I quite enjoyed. It was not really such a traumatic thing. But I think it's something, you just said disability, but I'm not sure, is it a disability? Because I think it's a different ability. And I think this whole idea that we educate it as a disability, and I did a kind of dyslexic talk for Savills, and I got to give them some money to a dyslexic charity, but I had to do it from the disability panel, and I was going, but this is so wrong. How are you putting us in a disability? We're not not there's anything wrong with being disabled or anything wrong with being anything else, but disabled implies you can't climb a set of stairs that has a physical boundary. We just think differently. So I think it's a really often faster, often better. I would argue. So I just really think we shouldn't use the distance.
Yeah, I'll clarify that as well. Aaron is a deaf artist, and he actually talks about deaf gain. Okay. So he does also challenge it himself, but I think he does identify as disabled, and he was talking about it in that way. But
and I would extend that, which is really, if you design a space for someone who is deaf, it hinders no one. It only makes the space a better space. I think I've also read articles that say if you design a space with autism in mind, it really doesn't hinder anyone. So it makes the space. So I think there's many of these things which we, that for me, sitting in a School of Architecture, the problem is that architects over the years are just fascinated with creating what's on the outside of the building and really not thinking about the environment that they're creating on the inside. And the inside so often becomes the leftover of the outside. And that is where the exclusivity becomes, but I've talked enough.
We got different patterns in the brain that activate and work. You got Dr. Helen Taylor, who promoted this year with saying if 20% of the people have dyslexia, or 15%, it's not an error anymore. It's part of the whole spectrum. So, and she got all kinds of research around that to prove that dyslexie is something that, or neurodiversity, is something that is needed to look different at different problems to solve. It's like fight or flight. Sometimes you can fight a crocodile. That's not.
She talks about something as a progression. There's complex lot of now. We need to be the
and if
normal getting us nowhere.
And if you
only the government first.
And if you look at Ernst & Young in the Netherlands and in the USA, they did research about neurodiversity within the company. So maybe the dyslexic people won't need to write a report. Somebody else can do it, but let's form a team and put the talents of somebody with dyslexia in the team and somebody with autism and everything all together, and everybody has his own talents and work together. So you got happy people, less sick people at home, stressed out, loyal people because they can prove their talents. And the whole group is more productive and can solve more problems and are more autonomous to work. What ends up? More money in the pocket of the company. There is no reason to do this and not accept this and look at the focus at, okay, we got different people, we all got different eyes, we all got different hair. What's the problem with the brain? We don't see it. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And then you got school, but still catching up. We got digital school boards. That's new. A teacher in the Netherlands get only 30 minutes of education about dyslexia in 4 years' time. Learning problem number 1, 30 minutes in 4 years' time. Maybe you missed that class. And what they learn to cover the school, detect the problem, send them out, let them test, come back with a label, done. Okay, you're 7, you're tested, you got your label. They come back and then, yeah, we detect the errors. Yeah, you do it wrong. Yeah, they know it already. You're not helping them. School need to catch up with the workforce. It's on the other way around because dyslexia is already active for around 20 years within education, and it's not getting anywhere.
Yeah, I'd agree on the school point. I wasn't diagnosed in school. It wasn't invented till 2001, Miss Avonia. So, all these people in care homes who are sitting underneath a clock and getting agitated. It's massive education that we still need to do about neurodiversity. But on the point of language, it's really complex. There is a call for disabled with a capital D and a small d, deaf with a capital D and a small d, disabled and neurodivergent, neurodiverse. They still can't agree on that to come through. So nobody will ever agree on language, but there's definitely a move to take neurodivergence outside of disability, and hopefully to move from disability. And now that many organisations are actually seeking people who are neurodivergent because of their very special talents. And you probably see in the press about autism and dyslexia. Apparently dyslexic people all see in 3D. There's a long way to go to see the benefits, but no, it's schools, they're not there yet.
No. If they could, like the regular school is around 150 years in the way that we know. Before that, a dyslexic person just saw it, what his dad did of his occupation, and could see, oh, you're doing, okay, I get it, done. We're not dyslexic, we're good learners that way. Then we go to books. Look, you, what? Yeah, we label you, you're not right for this kind of education. Okay, let's turn it around and make education in a way that neurodiversity people can learn, like through movies, like through doing stuff, going outside, and maybe it will be. There are setups around the world that try this in Germany and in San Francisco, but they are behind 150 years of education. But people do still look like them, and they say, yeah, but that's not how we do it in regular education. You need to full do and perceive this kind of level, but you got 150 years a head start. What do you expect? Give us some time, and I think when you open that gate, it will include more and more and more, and it will be more natural, and then it could be, I believe.
I think it's interesting, Christian, that you said that companies see it as a financial incentive to be more open, which is good, but also a shame that there has to be a financial incentive for people to be more caring. And I was wondering, I guess, yeah, what are the other incentives other than it's just the right thing to do and everyone benefits from it? But Abe, you mentioned that Maggie's was a really great brief and a really good client. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about what made that brief so unique compared to others, and maybe how often do you all come across clients who want to have a different approach because they kind of believe in it rather than it's something they're told they have to do or there's a financial incentive?
I mean, I think the key to a good client is the removal of bureaucracy, because the problem working in so many sectors is to create the effective change. You have to go through these layers and layers of bureaucracy. And I think as a neurodivergent person, we really don't get bureaucracy at all. I lasted 3 years of head of department at the Royal College of Art, and I couldn't do it anymore because of this crazy bureaucracy, which makes it so hard to affect the change, and the change is what we want to affect. Maggie's is a very, very lean team, very intelligent. Charles Jenks, who is now gone, Laura Lee and Marsha are the really main people. But also it's slow. You have to raise the money in parallel to design. So you have time to really research and learn and to talk to people. And more I design, the more and more I believe in the power of the collective intelligence and how to really do things which are authentic, which have real meaning. We need to talk to many different people, many different voices, many different diversities across the path in order to arrive at a design that can reach those corners. Now, Maggie's is not a massive budget, it's certainly not a massive fee, but there is enough openness that you can test and play and experiment and then share your outcomes with it. And they very seldom said no. They would say no. They would say this space is too big. They would say this is too complicated. Why you do? But they would never. If you came back and said I want to carve a series of door handles, they would go sure. Why not? There's really nothing wrong with that. My studio, in a way, took more persuading on that side. If they say, you want to have skylight in the, it's they have a brief, and you need to answer that brief. And the question is, how do you answer that brief? So that's what makes it so interesting. But I guess more than that, it feels more important than selling handbags. And over the years, I've sold many handbags, and and a few museums, and a few, which is great to get people to understand culture in different ways, to engage them. But the people who are going into a hospital in the most vulnerable moment, when they are completely, the power is removed from them, when they are in a moment when they have dignity removed from their privacy exposed, is a moment they really need design to come to their aid. And I suppose it's the discovery of the power that design has in that context. So when I go into Maggie's and somebody realizes that I've designed it, the conversations that I have with the people is not like any exhibition or shop that I've ever designed. It's a completely different quality of conversation, and they're so appreciative. And again, not because of my genius, they're appreciative because of the brief that is there. And all we are doing as the designers is interpreting that brief and using our collective intelligence to humbly get somewhere on a journey.
Add a piece about Maggie's. I had the pleasure of judging a Maggie's for an award that it did win. But I was with someone, an architect, who had a hearing impairment, and obviously I've got oversensitive hearing. We had this massive conversation about whether you want people to hear you cry when you're in trauma. There's all these things. And he said, well, no, we want people to be able to express themselves and worry about it. And I said, well, when I cry, I kind of want to do it in private. So there are so many things that you need to consider there. But I know you want to say something, do you?
Well, I think you absolutely have to have that. That's what, hence the kind of designing of the toilets to be as a chapel, to remove yourselves, designing of spaces to be alone in. But also the idea that you can have open spaces where different people are having conversations, and that murmuring, which is not the clicking of the tick, is a really important part of Maggie's. That someone can be talking over there and someone over here, and you hear that human activity going on. We spend a lot of time working on sound absorbing, so the acoustics are soft, sound's not bouncing. But by not having solid walls, you can share. But then there are many spaces you can go and have intimate moments beyond the toilets.
About just acoustics, not mind the other sensory factors all blending together. In terms of clients, it's taken decades to make people aware, but at last I'm working with people like the government and the BBC and lots of other organisations you wouldn't expect. Neurodivergence seems to be very interesting to architects and engineers and those people who do a particular kind of work in construction. So it's pushing through, but the key to talking about it, I find, is neuroscience. As we find out more and more about neuroscience, like the window being open behind me, like people not liking to sit in the middle of an office but having the protection of being against a wall. You're coming through with brain findings for these types of things. Everybody perceives temperature differently. And what happens with the gamma oscillations. When people take these key messages, they want to find out more about design and put them in because they know. For instance, when I've removed sharp lines from buildings, their absence rate has gone down, their retention rate has gone up, and there's research that proves that things are really, really positive, and that gees people on to do more and more. So it's kind of a slow message by a few people. There's not many people who really understand it. Neurodivergent people are best, but they're not the only people, because we're still all different. When we're neurodivergent, we've all got different stories. But if we keep talking about and sharing messages, then I think companies will come forward.
It's really important to talk about also because like 30 years ago there were not really tests, not really known. Those people are working. So I came across the tax office in the Netherlands. They got 140,000 people working and only 6 dyslexic. But they are not talking inside of communication. Also, last week with AA here in the UK, they do cars registration and that kind of stuff. We got only 6 people with dyslexia. Really, that's something wrong with your internal communication about something like this. Are you talking about it? Is there a culture to talk or come out? Because most of them have children and see, okay, they got the same problems like me on school. That's the same story. Maybe we need. Maybe I got it also. It's but not telling on the work, because it's not an open culture. Or maybe they think, okay, I work already 12 years here. If I open up now, they get something maybe against me, like you're working too slow or something. They are vulnerable. It's also culture. It's also talking about here, spreading the word about it, and it's and also like Helen Taylor, the work, like it's part of the human race. It's needed, and it's really necessary.
Any questions in the audience? I will come around with this mic, so please wait for the mic, because some people are watching online. So I think you put your hand up first. Thanks.
Everyone hear me in this voice?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I typically don't use a microphone because if I talk too loud, I will scare myself. I'm Yushi. I'm an undergraduate student from Barton School of Planning who is autistic and is currently cooperating with UCL Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience to do a research on how autistic people are living inside the current urban environment and what are the possible built environment factors that we could change. So my question is, how do you guys think of this kind of mindset that we are only doing design for a certain group of people belonging to the family of neurodiversity? Because I'm doing this in such an approach because I'm autistic and ADHD as well, and I don't know the world of dyslexia. I don't know the world of people who have other kind of neurodiversity characteristics, so I could only speak for myself and for my disorder, for my difficulties, and that's why I'm trying to at least fix this little part of this world. But I've also heard through the whole lecture, have noticed how people are talking about we have to be more inclusive, we have to include all the different subsets that belongs to this field. So I was wondering whether it is a possible approach to do it only step by step, or we have to start with a bigger blueprint at the very first beginning. Thank you.
I think I'm fascinated to see your research, obviously. But I think from a design perspective, if we design a space with better acoustics, if we design a space which has more haptics, which has more tactility, it is going to be a better space for autism, but it'll also be a better space for someone with neurodiversity. So we have to be very careful we don't end up in a situation where we design these very different spaces for all these different conditions, because then they become the opposite of inclusive. So I think it's by creating a series of guidelines we'll find there's a huge amount of commonalities which affect all of those spaces. A space with better acoustics is also much better for someone who is deaf. A space which has more tactility is also much better for someone who is blind. So these are common. These are common. What we don't want is this vast drama and these giant echoey, triumphant spaces. So it's kind of trying to take a much more humble route and trying to take something which is much more focused on the human, because I think the human that we are describing will feel much more comfortable in your space than they will be in the triumphant space.
And I do think it's a slow process, because the big group has no problems or don't even think about something like this. You got bureaucracy, you got money, you got all kinds of things that work against this. And I'm doing this from 2011, and I see slow progress in evolution, also in neurodiversity, because that was like 10 years not even talk about in general. So if you want something within this, I think App is doing a great job by every project trying to incorporate. And I think that not every company or would think about it or say this is part of the assignment, so you need to fight and put it in or get it in. But yeah, it's you against the big part of society to get them to educate them about it. So talk a lot, talk to everybody about it, and there it will change a bit by bit, but it is slow. It is slow.
Yeah, sadly it is slow, but thank you for sharing and for letting us know about microphones. The PAS tries to consider autism. We don't accept that that's the end, because we always advise designers and access consultants to communicate with people when they're designing. So when we're designing specifically for autism, there are certain guidelines, and you might want to have a look at those in the PAS. And we consulted with the Autism Society on the panel discussing the PAS. There was someone who owns the label, autism. Should I take a break? Okay, the flashing light has gone and the noise. So there is a lot in there, but we always have to learn, and yes, please share your research, because we fundamentally understand that some people seek and some people avoid sensory stimulation, and every environment has to be different. So it's not just making sure that the acoustics are right, but remembering that some people have hypersensitive hearing, like myself, and some people are deaf and have different needs. But there's a whole range, so you provide a selection of environments for people to choose, but not to be there in isolation, so they can still collaborate. So choice is a big word.
Thanks. Any other questions? Do you want to?
Yeah, so I'm also similarly not using a microphone because I'm right next to her. I was a student at the AA, graduated in 2019. When I received the email in my inbox that this lecture was happening, I was both happy but also very angry, because this university doesn't have disability services. There's no one to speak to if you want to declare your disability or even have any reasonable justice made. I only found out what disability services were when I started teaching at a different institution, and I went into my PG cert for training, and they asked me if I wanted to declare a disability and to get reasonable adjustments. And then I saw the whole process of like getting diagnosis if you need one, having a disability advisor, having speaking to DSA if you need, disability students allowance if you need one, and then getting the whole package of the internal support agreement sent to your tutor so the tutor knows how to adjust their teaching. There's none of that in this university. Asked for an extension for the deadline for handling it. There's obvious reasons why they would like service page. They will say, we're only doing this because this is mandated by law by the Equality Act. So it's like, is this university doing something illegal right now is my concern. And that's why I was slightly angry when it was the brief of this entire lecture series was new standards, let's make new things about, redefine the bare minimum, because this university likes to pretend it's like radical without even doing the basic thing, and that's what made me extremely angry that this conversation was being had, because you know what? I bet you with this kind of like working group they're trying to assemble, it's like, oh, we're going to try and be radical and do better than the bare minimum without doing it. We don't need to do the bare minimum because we're so radical, because this is what this university likes saying. I don't know if I really love the work that you do as panelists. That's not a question for you to answer, but this is the point I wanted to raise about the fact that this is happening right now, and it makes me angry. Because I've tried to raise this issue 3 years ago. I've actually asked, public program, if when I was a student, I was doing some student activism, I also asked, maybe we should have an interpreter on request with public program and access contact. None of that happened, and I don't know why it's happening right now. Thank you for
raising. Oh, sorry. Thank you for raising it, and I'm really sorry to hear about your experience. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, I'm sorry to hear that experience, and so I started at the AA in June, so I can't really speak for anything before, but I have asked colleagues about it because it's obviously important to this. Well, we've been thinking about it through this series and beyond. And I do, apparently now, when you apply, they have got you do declare. Oh yeah, no, I can't speak to that, but I'll bring it up.
How is that not something that's even been brought up for the past 12 years?
It has definitely been brought up now. And so I think this is something, it's really important that you raised it, because I think it shows, how urgent this change is at the AA, and I will definitely personally take it forward.
I want no pretending to be radical and forward-thinking, because this university is not.
No, I don't think through this series we're trying to say that the AA is radical. I think it's very blatant how inaccessible it is, and I think that was part of the importance of doing the series as a whole and having all the different events in the series, because there's a lot to learn for so many different reasons. So I hope that your points and other things that are raised in the series we can then actually take forwards and make very tangible change, and we'll be pushing for it. So thank you for raising your point.
Thank you for letting us receive your pain, and society's got a long way to go. Nobody's perfect, but I have to say that last week you had a speaker, Pip Jackson, who is a University Access Officer, doing a brilliant job, absolutely transforming it, very positive. And at the end of your sessions, you have Marsha Ramroop, who ran ROBA Radio and did, you heard it? A series of inclusion things. It's by those positive examples that people move forward and want to take this on, and we need to encourage people and understand your frustration at the same time.
But you can't believe the amount of gaslighting I received when I raised this concern 3 years ago.
Yeah, I can. Lots of people do.
Yeah.
There is a long way to go, but try and look at the good examples and promote them.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
No, thanks for sharing. But, the whole experience sometimes of coming out with these things, I think in society, we almost always have to get the conversation going. And when there are enough people having that conversation, change actually takes effect. So I've been recently diagnosed autism, and that process, or this start of trying to get, has been almost a 12-year process. Every time you go to the doctors, because I used to think it's only actually this time I've stuck with it because my son has just been diagnosed, and it's also because he's only been diagnosed to be able to access the school support, because if not, they can't support him there. And even in that environment, it's like, okay, we have a set of tick boxes for dealing with autistic children, for example. But he also has PDA, pathological demand avoidance, which is a completely different strategy. So the school is kind of like, what do we do? Because we've done all the tick boxes to deal with an autistic child, but we haven't, what is PDA? We don't even know it. So as parents, we're having to do the research to sort of inform them. But unfortunately, it looks like we would have to find a new school. And it's actually what led me to stick to this diagnosis this time around, because every time I went, even to doctors and all, to say, not that I think I'm weird, I think everybody else is weird. Something is going on here, you know what I mean? There's something wrong with everyone. I'm cool, you know? And it's been the same almost gaslighting thing as, what difference is it gonna make? You've gone through life already. I'm 39, like, why do you wanna do this? Not necessarily like understanding that it's important for me to know that I think differently. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You can't just tell me, why do you want to, it's not important, don't bother doing it, you know? Yeah, so, you know, I do understand the frustration sometimes being sort of, but it's just, if you're not speaking to the right people, or even if the organizational place, like, I run my own business because I've always struggled working in an environment, because they always make you feel like, why don't you just play a game? I don't understand. You know what I mean? They cannot relate to what you're going through. So the easier thing for me to do than to sit down in the organization and argue with everybody would say, I'm going to go start my own sort of practice. So very, you know, it's a very, very valid feeling and a very valid point that you have, you know, towards, you know, to the society and organization. But it is very common in our, you know, with people with sort of neurodiverse needs, because the same way we don't understand neurotypical people is the same way that neurotypical people don't really get us. So I think by having a language, by almost changing the language for both ND and NT people to be one around empathy, I think we really can make a lot of progress as a society. If you have any comments for that, sorry.
I think empathy is a really good thing, but without different people, the world doesn't turn around. So this is not a new thing, you know. I think Newton, all sorts of things going on, society needs to catch up, but I think they are, but they're not admitting it, because once you say you're inclusive, somebody else will come out and say, I've got different needs. So you need a bit of courage to talk about it, and to talk about language, even language. People don't want to say, so I say neurodiverse or neurodivergent, or it's a really scary thing. But the more people talk, the more we relax. So just keep talking.
And it's really important that you educate the teacher or your environment, and what we see a lot is, like in the Netherlands, you got your dyslexia protocol. That is made by professors that learned about dyslexia. So I always say, a professor is on the other side. He reads in Times New Roman. He can read very well. He's on the other scale, right? And he's gonna tell us, as dyslexic person, what we gonna do or how we gonna be treated. I always explain it. They have read Lonely Planet about Japan and saying, I know everything about Japan, while somebody from Japan will say, okay, you don't know shit. Yeah, it's hard, and people need to listen to the people where it's about, and some way deaf people, blind people, or people in a wheelchair are something that typical brain people more understand. The practice is still bad, because going around in a wheelchair is still not everywhere, but it's understandable. But neurodiversity within the brain, you look like me, what's what, like, yeah, and that's the biggest problem, that they just need to ask the person itself. It's like teachers helping, like, let's go to the same books that we used in the 80s, learn this word, but never in all those years they say, how do you like to learn? How do you like to learn? And that's something, and yeah, that's only that part can be coming from the person that has a neurodiverse brain.
I'm conscious that Bernadette and Samir have been working really hard signing and probably quite exhausted because we haven't stopped. So I'm going to wrap things up and say thank you once again to our wonderful speakers, and thank you all, and please stay around and have drinks and food and keep the conversation going, because I'm sure there's a lot more questions, and I'm sorry to cut them off early, but I think we're over time. So thank you, everyone.